to the Homeless in America podcast, hosted by Metro Relief. We're diving into the deep end of homelessness and exploring ways you can help your community. Get ready for relevant stories from the streets with special guests and the leadership of Metro Relief.
Thank you guys. Welcome to Homelessness and Michele Steeb. Really, we didn't know what else to say or call this because we want to talk to Michele today about what Housing First looks like in her mind and how we deal with it too here at Metro Relief. And I wanted to talk to you about Charlie, even though I've been calling him the wrong name all day.
Yeah,
Charlie
that's all right.
is my co-host, and we're here to talk with your friend. Please introduce.
Well, Michele, it's an honor to have you here. We were talking before we started, and it was the white paper on homelessness that you wrote when I reached out to you on LinkedIn. Although I'd been stalking everybody's posts.
Stalker?
Yeah. I was reading everything, and then the next one that really grabbed me was subsidizing addiction. That's another one, right?
That's not a white paper I've written, but yes, it's one I referred to, yes.
Yeah, and then the one you just wrote, Why Converting Hotels into Homeless Housing Doesn't Usually Work. So it's amazing that you're sitting here and you're going to talk to us. We're in homeless ministry. And you've gone from a successful political campaigns, even helping a senator, right? Mm-hmm. And then you founded two successful companies. And you served as the vice president of the California Chamber of Commerce. And now you're a senior fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And I just like the way you guys think about everything. And so we're interested to find more about that. So why don't you tell us first about how you wrote the white paper? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, sure. The one part of my career that you left out, which is probably the most relevant to our conversation, is that I ran a program for homeless women and children for 13 years in Sacramento.
Believe I missed that one.
So one of my favorite sayings in the world is, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And my plan was to continue in my career at the California Chamber, where I ran public affairs. And God clearly had a different plan. I was loaned to a struggling emergency shelter for women and children for 30 days to try and turn it around. It was about to close its doors. And this was in my fourth year of running public affairs for the chamber.
Okay.
And I went over there and fell in love with the work. At that time, St. John's was a 30-day emergency shelter for women and children. We served about 100 women and children a day. Huh. And I had this, so I was still an employee of the chamber on loan to the shelter. And because I was still an employee of the chamber for that month, I had to attend the mandatory employee things. So we had how to hire an independent contractor, when you can do it seminar at the chamber. And I was kind of 2 weeks into my 30-day tenure at St. John's, and was sitting on the 15th floor of a very majestic building downtown across from the Capitol, and looking out at the Capitol while I was listening to this seminar that, by the way, I had been hiring independent contractors in my line of work with the chamber for years. So I knew so much of what was going to be discussed at that seminar. So I'm sitting there looking out at the Capitol, and on my BlackBerry, because that's what we had at the time, I'm getting all these messages about the life and death situations that we were facing, both with our women and children and as an entity, because we were very close to closing our doors, including the fact that the food truck wasn't coming because we hadn't paid our bill. AT&T was threatening to shut off our phones. Oh. And I just had this, moment of clarity. What am I doing with my life? Why am I sitting here in this? I mean, it's a beautiful building. I loved my colleagues. I love my work. But what really matters is what's happening at St. John's. So
that's wonderful.
I finished my 4 weeks, and January 3rd walked into the CEO of the chamber, my boss, and said, I'm not going to come back, but I'll help you, find my replacement. And anyway, never looked back.
What year was that when you started St. John's?
Well, St. John's was started in
Right.
1985. I came in December of 2006.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So December of 2006, you were kind of blindsided. You were really in a chamber, and I know a little bit about the chambers and how they run. It's really about for profit and trying to figure out how you're going to do best in your business and all that. And then this nonprofit with homeless women and children just took your heart.
Yeah. Blindsided is maybe, it's an interesting word. I would say my eyes were opened.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. The opposite.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Your eyes wide open. I like that. That's interesting. Go ahead.
So then how long, then what happened? Because now
So,
tell us
oh
your
my
story.
gosh, I could spend so many hours boring y'all with the details, but I'll tell you probably the most important part of my story, which is, again, we were a 30-day emergency shelter. And within a couple weeks of my coming on board, a woman named Katie came in with her daughter, Tori. And a couple days later, a woman named Shelley came in with her 2 boys. And I was shocked to learn that Katie and Shelley were sisters. But the bigger shock was to learn that 18 years earlier, so again, we were started in 1985, 18 years earlier, Shelley and Katie and her mom lived at St. John's. And it was in that moment that I said, we cannot just be a 30-day emergency shelter and think that we're helping change the trajectory of these lives. We really need to do more. And so I began pulling in our, the team members. We were a very, very small team. I knew very little about, I knew how to raise a family, and I knew how to run political campaigns, but I didn't really know much about homelessness yet at this point.
Yeah.
So I pulled everyone in and said, we're going to sit down and meet every week until we can figure out what kind of program we need to build to help them change the trajectory of their lives, and including bringing in some clients into those meetings.
And I wrote down, so it started in 1985, and this was 2000
2007 at this point.
So, and I think it's interesting because you did political campaigns and some other things, how they needed money.
Yeah.
So they were going to close their doors when you came. And that's how good God is. You know what I mean? Because you came with all this skill that you had from the political world, which is all about the money.
Yep.
And you go there and the Lord opens your eyes and captures your heart. And then you're like, oh, and you pivot.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
In fact, it's so I haven't thought about this in a long time, but I called all the big companies I worked with and I said, I need money.
Yeah.
We ended up at the end of 2007 with a $240,000 surplus. Our budget at that point was like 1.1 million.
Oh.
So yes,
so you did that, plus you tried to corral the kittens.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To get it going so that they could, like you said, change somebody's life.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we began building out this program, and that's really what I did from 2007 through 2019 when my husband took a job here in Texas and we packed up and moved here, was build out an 18-month program that helps these women and children change their lives permanently. So we brought in mental health counseling. We brought in drug and alcohol counseling. We brought in employment training. We started 2 restaurants and a daycare program that were hands-on employment training programs for the women and children. We brought in transportation because the public transportation system in Sacramento is inadequate. I'm trying to be kind. And we really didn't want them spending 4 hours to get downtown to do something, right? We could drive them there in 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah. So did you give them a bus pass?
Oh,
Was that the way it was going? And then the buses weren't reliable?
Exactly.
And if they're an addict and they're staying in temporary housing, you can turn on a dime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because of
I'm
the people
sorry.
that are around you, right? I mean, it's very important, especially early in your recovery, that you surround yourself with people that are on the same path. And that's not always the case in the public transportation system.
That's why you needed vehicles.
That's why we needed vehicles. So we got vehicles donated. But we really, we brought in money management classes. We brought in, and health classes. We brought in a fantastic chef who prepared meals. Like, I'll never forget one day he was really new to our program, and everyone was raving about lunch. And believe me, we had a lot of resistance to our meals because people were very used to eating McDonald's or chips or whatever, right? Carbs. And so everyone was raving about lunch, and I was doing a tour, and I said, well, what did you have for lunch? And they said fig and goat cheese salad, and it was fantastic.
Nice.
I was like, win, because I'm a pretty healthy eater. And I believe in especially when you've been draining your system for so long because of drugs or alcohol or, your just the way you've been eating, right? So we brought in fitness classes, we brought in church services. And so when I left St. John's, we weren't done building it. I had to leave because of the decision that my family made. But we were, at that point, serving about 230 women and children a day.
Oh, then it went up.
Oh, yes.
They were doing 100, so you more than doubled it.
Yes, we did. And we served them over an 18-month period of time. And we built a campus. All of this happened, over a long period of time. So when I left, again, we weren't done, but we were really, there's so many women who now came through the program at the point I left who are now homeowners, right?
That's awesome.
Single women in California, which is not an easy place to afford, to buy a home.
Especially Sacramento.
Yeah. Who are stable, secure. They're not living perfect lives. They're not, there's no waterfalls in their lobbies, but they are living fantastic lives.
Sometimes we put expectations on people we've helped that we don't even really hold ourselves to, because the way we say they're doing okay, but they're doing this, but everybody struggles, in life with everything.
Yep.
So that's awesome.
This was a program that you said 200 and some women a day. That means there was probably around 100 families or...
Yeah, so about 35% of our women had their children temporarily removed from their custody. So some came in as singles, some had kids that were already... Sense. So I would say we probably served about 80 families a day on average. But I don't even like to talk about a day because that's really a shelter measurement.
Yep.
It's really that we served about 800 to 900 women and children over the course of the year.
And
that's awesome.
Graduated, so to speak, after they completed 18 months.
Some were able to complete sooner, right? Everyone, and that's part of the problem we're going to get into is there is no one size fits all, right?
No, there's not.
Some people need a lot more than others do. So I think our average length of stay was somewhere around 7 months, but that also included the people who left early because they got a little tired with the structure and the rules and the requirements.
The boundaries. Because they want to do what they want to do.
Yeah. What did you like most about your time there?
Oh my gosh, there was so much I loved. I would say that, number one, I mean, by far was the clients.
Yeah.
I was on the phone with one of our alums this morning who is doing so fantastically well, but she hit a hard, tough situation and asked for my advice, which I'll still do. I follow them on Facebook and I tell them to watch their swearing and and cheer them on when there's some great accomplishments for their kids or, try to console them when they hit
when they're down, when they get tough. I did transitional living for a couple of years and I think got to know maybe 450 men and there's a good percentage, nothing big, but 12 or 13 of them that I have a relationship with.
Absolutely.
And they're doing well and a couple of them have relapsed or but they bounce back then, and so you want it's it's good to be there for them in the good and the bad.
Absolutely.
And even when it's just floating along.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, at the end of the day, the reasons, there are two reasons people become homeless. It's a deficit of income and a deficit of community. And we really need to, help them get to a point where they have both of those.
Yeah.
And we're part of that community,
Yeah.
right? The people who work there, but also the people that live there. And that's one of the reasons we formed an alumni association, so our alums could stay connected. It's almost, a little bit similar to the AANA model, right?
Yeah.
Where they come together, we do events, they come and they help the women that are currently in the program.
It makes me think the community, you put somebody that's lived in an encampment in a homeless encampment, and they've been there for 6 years, let's say, or in that area. They've gotten to know all the other people, and you take them and you put them in an apartment. There's a gap because suddenly they're alone. So really that apartment can become a trap house or whatever you want to call it, or a crash pad, or they're going to end up, you're going to see them 2 weeks later out sleeping on the street because they missed their friends.
Absolutely.
So there is a gap in there. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And we should talk about that gap,
Yeah.
because one of the arguments that I've made is in this whole housing first approach, exactly what you said. We're not addressing the community aspect of what people need in order to heal and grow and develop and thrive. We have, when Housing First was implemented, all of the money from the government money that was being spent on transitional housing and shelters went into permanent housing subsidies.
Yeah.
And so not only is our shelters and transitional housing an opportunity to build community, it's a much more effective way to deliver services. Services are the most important component of the equation, right? Mental health, drug and alcohol counseling, employment training, that all requires people who have, professional degrees who understandably have a higher, rate of salary than, a regular minimum wage worker would. But we can much more effectively and efficiently deliver those services in congregate living environments while we're helping them build community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting perspective that we were talking earlier about how some people in their addiction like to isolate. And then there's lots of people, we see it all the time, that need community. So they sleep in encampments. And then whenever you take them out, you just mentioned it, Charlie. You take them out of that environment, put them in their own apartment or living by themselves somewhere, and then you see them back outside because they don't want to be alone in the apartment. I think it's just people act different.
Yep.
But the community part, I think, is real important. I think one of the things that we mess up a lot of times is people end up on the street. All their relationships have to be almost broken. Because if my brother ended up homeless, man, you can stay at my house. A lot of times, in order to end up outside, you have to break all those relationships. So it's not like always there's a place for them to go. So we have to find a way to kind of create that for them.
That's where we utilize diversion a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So how with your knowledge, when was the first housing for you? Both probably know this. I don't. The first rapid rehousing money. When did that start?
Well, Housing First, in principle, started in New York in the 90s, in New York City, because the idea was they have a growing problem on the streets of New York with largely men, but not exclusively men, who are severely mentally ill and addicted. They're costing the system a lot of money being on the street, public safety, healthcare, all the costs we all know about. How do we get them into housing and start to get them stabilized and get them services, right? That was the thinking. And so Housing First was a practice developed then to to do just that, right? To get the street homeless off the streets and into housing as quickly as possible. To do that, they said, we need to not require anything of these people. Otherwise, they're not going to want the housing. So we can't require sobriety. We can't require that they engage in treatment. We will start to bring them those things, and we think they're going to want to accept them once they're in housing. That there's not very much in the way of long-term, in fact, I don't even know if there's anything in the way of long-term measurement of how that actually worked. But in 2008, the Bush administration, in their final year, adopted housing first for the chronically homeless, largely the street homeless. Chronically homeless had a different definition at that point.
Yeah, I think it did too.
Yeah,
didn't
it did.
In New York?
Everywhere.
Yeah. And so they began implementing it in 2008 for, again, this very small segment. And by the way, this is a really important point that I mentioned in my book. The street homeless, the severely chronically homeless, it looks like that's the majority of the homeless population because that's who we see on the exit of freeways or downtown and on the stoops of businesses. But that's only about 10 to 20% of the entire population. 10 to 20%. So we took a treatment program, if you will, right? We took I'm blanking on the word, but we took a philosophy that was developed for 10 to 20% of the entire population. And then in 2013, the Obama administration rolled it out as a one-size-fits-all solution. It was never even proven to work for everyone who's homeless. And by the way, we're talking about 2 to 3 million people right now in the United States that are homeless. You got to ignore HUD's numbers. HUD's numbers are bogus. They say it's about 580,000. It's way bigger than that, according to Department of Education and a lot of other studies that have been done. So we're talking 2 to 3 million people. There's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
And we rolled this out. No studies on how it would work for the entire population. And now we see the explosion, and I can walk you through the data. But rapid rehousing came just before the one-size-fits-all rollout, somewhere around 2010, 2011, in response to the economy, right? That's when we were going through another really low point in our economy, and they felt that giving, 6-month subsidies, housing subsidies, was going to be the answer. There's a lot of studies out of that initial rapid rehousing infusion that show how many people actually, especially families, rebounded back into the system.
It's crazy. She's right. I mean, just crazy how many people stay on the streets.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you think about the number. Like the HUD number is 580. It's went down over the years, very little each year. How do you think we got more people than that? I agree with you. I think there is, but I just don't know how we determine how many people there are.
So let's start by saying the 580 is a 2020 number. There hasn't been a new, there's not a compilation of the counts yet for 2022. We're still waiting on that. If you look at, so the big delta here is HUD relies on a revised definition of McKinney-Vento, which is the homeless family definition, a revised McKinney-Vento homeless family definition. The Department of Education uses the tried and true McKinney-Vento definition. Department of Education in 2020 said about 1.4 to 1.6 million homeless K through 12 students. That does not include the parent or parents or any non-K through 12 siblings.
Yeah.
So we need to, at the federal level, reconcile that definition delta.
Yeah.
Because not only do we not have an accurate baseline as a count, the families that don't meet the HUD definition are completely ineligible for the HUD resources, which are it's the vast majority of government resources available to the homeless.
Yeah.
You know, in the Dallas area, Mesquite High School has a whole homeless division to help families. And in the city of Garland, they have that. And I didn't think of that. You know, oh, yeah, we got 500 students that are homeless. And you don't think, wow, where's the kids' parents?
Yeah.
Well, it's the whole fam.
Yeah.
It's the whole family.
Well, let me give you an example
Yeah.
here locally, too. And by the way, every school district is supposed to have a homelessness liaison office. It's funded by Department of Education. But in McKinney, the number of homeless, or Collin County, I should say, is around 400, give or take. That's the latest number. In McKinney ISD alone, 750 is the approximate, again, K through 12 students, not including their parent or parents or non-K through 12 siblings. So there's a big, big delta, and it's a big problem.
Huh. And McKinney's mayor, George Fuller, he wants to do something about it. He knows there's an issue. So I didn't know that about McKinney.
Mm-hmm.
I think homelessness in general over the years we've been getting more and more aware, and are going back to what you were talking about policy, and in that I think, I mean, at least our lifetime, I feel like there's been so many different efforts for us to figure out how we house and help people who are poor become housed,
Yeah.
and stay housed. One of the ways that we've done it is projects. I grew up right next door to a project. And we largely have gone away from that idea because it didn't work. I think that most of our programs have failed, and we have some that we can, and some that work. And I usually think it's because of a person. It seems like someone like yourself, Michelle, the reason why St. John's was doing well is because you were there and you cared. It seems like over and over, the people that invest into the person is the success ones. You know, those ones that are successful. It's the people you can look back and it has to be person centered. That's the kind of way we look at it at Metro Relief. We always say person centered, solution focused. So if we put the person in the middle, and then we surround them with solutions. And it's really hard because, just like you said, for as many people that are homeless, there's a different reason why they're there, and there's a different complexity or conundrum sometimes of problems that led to their actually being outside.
Yeah, it's like morbidity, try more. You know, just all these things going on at once in a person's life. So we use a lot of diversion, and we're partaking in trying to get people housed. We did it before. Now we're part of a bit of a program, and we've seen it, and it's interesting to be a part of where you're trying to do it. How do I say that?
Do what? What do you mean? What are you trying to say?
When it seems like the solution, the people that we're trying to help, is only cookie cutter. It's only you get them into a place.
What's really unique about us is that we can take anybody that's on the street, whatever their complexity is, their conundrum of reason they got there, and hopefully help them figure out how to get out of it. So we don't have the same program for everybody. Some people need detox. Some people need rehab. We have a lady who's 70-some, sleeping outside. She needs government housing. We need to sign her up. She needs mental medication. You know, whatever we try to do, it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Right.
And most of the government programs or policies that they put in place are meant to be programs. I mean, that's kind of the way it works. And you have to fit into this, and you just
Fit into that system.
And yeah, you just talked about how kids in the education department might not fit into the HUD's category. So then that means they don't get the funding. It's like a vicious, endless cycle. And it seems like the places that I've seen solutions, it's where people get in, dive in, and try to figure it out. It's like the buck stops with me. I'm going to figure out how to help you. And when I did that a couple times, the biggest problem was actually like if I find JoJo on the street, I'm like, JoJo, I'm going to solve your homelessness. He's willing to get off the street. Sometimes the only way you can do it is take him home.
Yeah.
Because the resources are difficult.
Well, I very much agree. In fact, our initiative at Texas Public Policy Foundation is
Tell us about
called
it.
People First.
People
Yeah.
first.
That's-
I like that.
Yeah, it's got to be people
Yeah.
first.
People, instead of
Person-centered.
Yes, yeah.
Person-centered people
Yeah.
first. I mean,
Exactly. And that's exactly what we need to do. That's what you guys are talking about. That's what we did at St. John's.
People first.
That's the,
Tell me about it.
well, we, and I'm so grateful to Texas Public Policy Foundation for bringing me on to develop this initiative because policy has failed the homeless. And I want to talk about some of those numbers at some point today. But it's failed the homeless, it's failed communities. And by the way, when they rolled it out in 2013, when HUD rolled it out as a one-size-fits-all, they literally promised, it's in writing, that this would end homelessness in a decade.
Yeah.
And we are coming up on that anniversary.
that's the thing we were talking about in San Antonio. You were saying it was scrubbed. We were talking about the one numbers.
Well, okay, so what that conversation was about was a report that came out in 2020, October 2020.
That's right. I'm sorry. I
Yes.
moved you.
Called Expanding the Toolbox.
Yeah.
And
You saw that.
that report was the first ever analysis of how we were doing under the one-size-fits-all rollout of Housing First in 2013.
Yeah.
I have all that data, which I want to share with you. But bottom line is it has not worked. I am not opposing Housing First. I oppose Housing First as a one-size-fits-all solution. And that's what our initiative is all about. It's about looking at people, getting at the root causes of what led them to homelessness, giving them the services they need to heal and grow and prosper as human beings. That's what our initiative is all about.
What you said, root causes. How do you say that word? ROOT. How you say it?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest.
That's why I want to know where you grew up. How you say it?
He's the Indiana boy.
Rut.
Rut. Okay. Yeah, the rut causes. I like that.
Because my experience is I've gotten people, we diverted, it can happen with anybody. So there was a 70-year-old lady I met last November in a warming station. I go up to talk to her at the Salvation Army, and she wouldn't talk to me, and she says, nobody will listen to me. So I went and got one of her homeless friends, and she went over and got her to talk to me. And so I was like, why do you mean? And she said, my sisters had a room for me up in North Texas for 7 months. And I've been telling all you people, all I need is to get to my sisters. And Stacy and Melissa on staff took her there the next day.
That's great.
But here's the thing. I'm driving through a city, and she was sitting on the corner 7 months later. And that made me think about the generational homelessness, because this lady's nice. She's got a daughter that's homeless. So the dichotomy or whatever of the family, it's 4 generations.
Yep. And
4 generations of homelessness. So our friend went up there. She hanged out, lived with her sister, had her own rooms, nice house. But when I found out by talking to Wendy, the daughter drew her back, and she's on the streets living in the woods again. And that happens with same thing happens putting people in houses or apartments, or, we've taken a guy to detox 3 times in the last 4-5 weeks. And I have some people say, how many times are you going to take them? How many times do you want to go?
Yeah.
You never know if it's going to stick.
What did Jesus say? 7 times 70. Right?
Yeah. And now if somebody who maybe, there's some people that would scoop him up and put him into an apartment, which I wouldn't argue with them if that's what they want to do. But it's interesting how person first, is that people first?
People first, yeah.
Person-centered. It really does. You have to look at everybody. And it's a lot more work.
And I'll tell you, I will just tell you, I would disagree with the whole idea of just putting him in a house, because you know what? We haven't prepared him to be successful in that house. And so he will fail, very likely. And that will just reinforce a narrative that he has been told or he's been through his entire life. It reinforces, I'm not good enough to do this.
And I agree with you, because I'm not so sure. I know I could maybe help him, but I know he needs to try to quit drinking before he gets thrown into a loan. And, you know, I mean, I'm still like always going around in my head about the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
It can be, you know.
Well, I think we're all talking about it. I mean, it's really,
Yeah.
it's individualized, customized support and how you can help that person get off the street. We're boots on the ground right out
Boots
there.
on the ground, quality driven. We want to be, not quantity.
But Michelle, what you're talking about, I'd really like to know what numbers you'd like us to see.
Yeah.
Because
Sure.
we want to tell people, and we want to talk about things that are going to make a difference, not just have a conversation that makes us feel better about ourselves.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So let me talk about two studies. One is the study that was just released last year out of Boston. This is
Boston.
This is a long-term study looking at housed chronically homeless individuals.
Okay.
So for the first 2 or 3 years, the numbers look pretty good, but between 3 and 6, after year 6, like 35% are housed. 30-something% died. Many more are unaccounted for, right? So it's a small study, but it's important because it's the first long-term study that's looked at how these housed individuals do over time.
Okay.
And I highly recommend, we can put maybe a link up. I
Yeah,
can
we
send you
will.
the link. Yeah.
Tell us what it is.
So I'll send that to you.
Okay.
But the real important data is the data that Charlie, you referred to earlier, that got taken down by the current administration when they got into office, and they have since put it back up after we pointed out that when a new administration comes in, sometimes they archive data, but they don't make it disappear.
Yeah.
And this administration made it disappear because they're very strong advocates for the housing first approach. And the data in the report, which is all HUD data, was very damning. So the idea with Housing First, again, developed for the severely chronically homeless, was to get people off the street, don't require anything of them, so they go into the housing. So we don't require sobriety. We don't require engagement in mental health or drug and alcohol counseling or employment training or any sort of reunification efforts with your children, education, completing your high school. We don't require any of that. When HUD rolled out Housing First, the idea was, well, we'll get them in housing and then they'll want those services. What no one talks about is the fact that HUD completely defunded services in 2013. All of that money, again, we talked about this earlier, it's expensive to provide services in the short term, not in the long term, because in the long term, people are healed and they can do a lot more in terms of their productivity and contribution towards their livelihood. But in the short term, it's more expensive. So that funding source went away. So now if I'm a nonprofit, first of all, I've morphed to Housing First because most nonprofits in this space rely heavily, if not exclusively, on government funding. So in order to survive, I had to move to Housing First.
Mm-hmm.
But I no longer have this funding source for services. So as a nonprofit leader, and you guys run nonprofits, I did too, we have to go out and find that money. And it's a big chunk of money. And there's not a lot of other options. Or you raise it, right? Which is what St. John's ended up doing. We raised it from the community. We never got one dime of government funding for drug and alcohol services, mental health services, employment training, none of that. We raised money. So nonprofits, even though they're supposed to offer services to the people when they're in housing, they're not doing it because they don't have them, because they can't find the funding for it.
True.
And then you have the other dynamic that people who are mentally ill and or addicted, which is 78% of the homeless population, often also suffer from anosognosia, which is a deficit of self-awareness. So they're not in a state of mind where they're going to be requesting services, even if they are available.
Because
Right. So let's see. Let me
I know
talk.
some of them.
Of
They're my
course.
friends. and
Absolutely.
They're
Mine
not
too.
aware. They just don't.
No. And, my gosh, I know a lot of people that are not addicted or mentally ill and who suffer
Officer
lack of self-awareness.
Wendy and I were in a campground just this
Charlie's
week.
not self-aware. Sometimes I tell him.
Yeah. We were in an encampment. This guy's, he's been in this spot for a long time, and Wendy's talking to him. And I just looked at him and said, dude, are you just good? I'm good. And I was like, all right. I mean, what are you going to do? But I did say to him, I said, how old are you? And he said he was 64. I said, you think it's time you ought to start thinking about what you're going to do? You're going to get old, dude. You're old now. Mm-hmm. And he kind of thought about it, but then he went blank-eyed, and it was like he just wasn't aware.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, so let's talk about the data. So the idea, again, get them into housing, then get them services, right? Which we talked about is not happening barely anywhere in the country. But the data shows that once that rollout happened in 2013, at the federal level, we increased the number of permanent supportive housing units by 47.1% between 2013 and 2019. This is all in that Expanding the Toolbox report. The homelessness rate went up by 20.5% in the unsheltered population. Supposedly the population for which this, treatment, Housing First treatment, was designed, by 15.6% in the overall sheltered population. This is during a very good economy. Remember, this is when, we had a much more robust economy.
Yeah.
And pre-COVID, I must point out, so you can't, point to COVID and say this is the problem. Another example, and this is in our white paper.
Yeah.
That you alluded to earlier, Charlie, is California. California is the only state that went all in on Housing First. They embedded it into state statute in 2016.
Yeah.
Yep. So, again, permanent housing units went up by 33%, but homelessness went up in the unsheltered population by 47.1%.
Yeah.
Again, during a fantastic economy. And by the way, at the federal level, over that period, spending increased by 200%. In California, it increased by 101% at minimum. So something went very wrong. We had a pretty steady state of homelessness up until then. And really, you can't, you'd have to be a very
dense person to not understand that didn't work.
Yeah.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
Those are your words.
Dense. You have to be dense.
Is it dance? Is there any root in that?
Dense means like hard to understand.
I don't know. I'm going to Google that because I just don't understand. I think I'm dance.
You said that there was 2 reports.
Mm-hmm.
Is that one of them?
One of them is the Expanding Toolbox report that HUD and Usage put out in 2020, the one that the Biden administration buried, but now after hearing from a bunch of us, they've reinstated it. Again, it's called Expanding the Toolbox 2020. The report, the white paper that I wrote, is called What's Fueling the United States Homeless Crisis. And that's not been buried by the Biden administration.
Okay, good.
It is alive and well on the TPPF website.
Where can people find your content?
They can find a lot of my content at texaspolicy.com, which is the URL for Texas Public Policy Foundation. I also have a website, michelesteeb.com, MICHELESTEEB.com.
Okay. How and I forgive me for not knowing this. Did you write a book?
I did.
She did, and
I
I
did.
failed miserably. I forgot about St. John's, and I didn't mention your book.
Well,
Please edit that out of the show.
what is the book called?
The book is called Answers Behind the Red Door.
Yes, I did know this.
Yeah.
One time I did.
Yes, and the Red Door is at St. John's. We went through because we used to be a shelter, and then we evolved, as I mentioned earlier, to an 18-month program. We went through
That's just so awesome.
a rebranding because we were called St. John's Shelter, and people, because shelter was in our name, they still thought about us as a shelter. So we, took shelter out of our name and called ourselves St. John's Program for Real Change. But we also made the Red Door, all of the doors at St. John's, every bedroom door, our front door, were red. The red door is very symbolic, religiously. It's also a symbol of good luck and feng shui, but also in times of slavery, the red door was a place you knew you could escape to escape bondage.
Yeah.
And so Answers Behind the Red Door is a story of how we evolved at St. John's, how our clients evolved, and how public policy has really fueled this crisis.
Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, we'll
today.
put a link to all that.
Thank you.
I believe that we need conversations like this, and if we could have more of them, I'd be more in favor of that any time we can. So thank you for coming.
You're
Thank you for
welcome.
sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you for standing up for what you believe is right. And St. John's story is awesome. Thank you for doing all that. We got opportunities for volunteers for all kinds of things that you could help out with here at Metro. We would love to have you around more and your impact. So
Well, I will look forward to that, and I want to thank y'all for what you do and for having me here today.
of course, you are sobering voice behind
Yeah.
this problem that we're having. So thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle.
All right. Peace out.
Like what you heard? Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Our team will respond to any questions you have. This podcast depends on support from its viewers, and if you want to get directly involved, join Metro Relief as a donor or volunteer at metrorelief.org.